Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. So today what I'd like to take you through is how to treat your shin splints from home. Shin splints are an issue that it doesn't just affect people who run or participate in running based activities or sports. It can affect people just walking around normally, and as sort of people start to get outside more and more, there's a chance that shin splints might be something that crops up a little bit more than previously. So it's good to have a few ideas of how to treat that yourself, but also to recognize the start of it and sort of how it happens, and then how to go about fixing it so that you can manage it as best as possible. So before we get to the video, for these videos we hope to sort of get out to as many people as possible, and in order to do that, we sort of have to play the game that YouTube presents for us. So if you do go on to like the video, please leave a like below, and consider subscribing to the channel if you are new. Those factors really help these videos get out to more people, so any help and support you can give us would be great. So, shin splints. So as a lot of people may know, shin splints affects the shin. And what it is basically is you've got a bunch of muscle tissue that attaches into the shin bone, and the tendons themselves, the soft tissue itself, can become irritated and inflamed and sore. And in more sort of extreme cases, the bone itself, the bone where the tendons attach into, the muscles and the tendons attach into, that itself can develop into an issue itself. You get some bony stress related issues, and in very severe cases you can have stress fractures and things like that. So what's important to know about shin splints, like most, at least lower leg conditions, is that the part of the body that's become irritated, sore, overloaded and potentially injured, that is the consequence of something else. So obviously the pain and dysfunction is very local for a lot of people. And because it's local and because it's painful, it often gives us sort of tunnel vision and narrows our focus onto just where that problem is. So obviously we want to give you some things to address the pain and discomfort in this area. But if we're not also having a conversation about what's going on above and below that with the rest of the leg, then we're potentially missing out on sort of the bigger picture, missing out on the reasons why that specific section of your shin has become sore in the first place. So we'll touch on 3 pretty simple exercises to treat your shin splints, and then we'll just have a conversation towards the end as to why that happens and what you can do to stop that from happening and to stop that from coming back again. So, excuse me. So the first exercise that we want to, well, maybe not the first exercise, we'll get to those in a second, but probably the first thing to talk about is icing. Now, for a long time, we've promoted that the first thing you do with pain or injury is to reach for an ice pack. We won't go into too much detail today, but we've done a video on that before. We've got an article out as well, so I'll link to that in the description. But the idea here is that for a long time, icing was the thing to do. But more recently, we've started to realise that it may not be doing what we've expected it to do. The short story basically is that it's good for pain relief, but if you use it for pain relief, there's also consequences, potentially negative consequences, for the rate at which that tissue heals. Ice restricts blood flow, which is the very sort of thing that injured tissue needs to sort of correct itself. So in terms of swelling and inflammation, ice may actually be doing the opposite, or at the very least putting pause on that healing process. So as I said, just some food for thought there. So I guess the idea is, please don't feel the need to immediately reach for an ice pack if it's sore. Go through these exercises first, and maybe come back to it if you feel like the pain's out of control, or if you're not sleeping very well, then you can make a judgment call on what you want to do. But the first exercise we want to look at is a calf stretch. Now, if you've ever had shin splints before, you've probably been given this pretty much as a routine. What we see a lot clinically is if the calf muscle is really tight, we lose a lot of the shock absorption that happens when your foot contacts the ground. And if there's less ability to absorb that shock has to go somewhere else. And if you don't get knee pain from that, if you don't get a sore ankle, then that sort of load can sort of center on the shin itself. So we want to do a very basic calf stretch to begin with. And how that looks for a lot of people, or a great way to do this, is if you have a step, obviously. If you don't have a step and you have a wall or the corner of the wall, we want to try and get your heel as close to the wall as possible, keeping your legs straight, squeezing your bum. We want to try and press that hip towards the wall or the door frame as far as you feel comfortable, until you feel some tightness in that calf. And then what we want to do is, wherever that tightness is, we want to take a deep breath in, and we want to squeeze that calf muscle. We want to tense that calf muscle, push it back into the surface that it's on. Again, same thing if you're on a step. Hold that for 5 to 10 seconds, and then relax. And what should happen is you should be able to go a little bit further straight away. And what you can do here is you can play around. You can twist your hips towards your little toe. You can twist your hips towards your big toe. Just try and explore different aspects of that calf to try and find where your tight spots are. So for me, if I twist towards the wardrobe here, I can find some tightness more on the outside of my calf. So take a deep breath in, tense those muscles. This gets your brain involved. It asks that tissue to give, so that when you relax, you should feel like it's a little bit looser straight away. Now, if you have shin splints, then you'll probably find that's rock hard. It's a very tight part of the body. But then the faster you can free that up. So doing that exercise, that calf stretch with the contractor relax, it's called PNF stretching. It's a fantastic way to make immediate results. So if you don't walk away from that stretch feeling like your calf is immediately looser, then you haven't done anything. You haven't done it correctly. You haven't made a difference. You should always feel a difference if there is one. And you always deserve to have change. So that's the first one. So the basic calf stretch, it's not very sexy, it's not very interesting, but it's a very good symptomatic treatment to try and feed some slack back into the front of the shin, take the pressure off that, and allow it to be loaded more normally. Now the second part of the equation that we often find is that the tissue at the front of the shin or the front of the side of the shin often gets tight as well. Now, with any of these, you can massage. So you can massage the front of your shin, you can massage your calves, you can use a foam roller to do both. But I find a ball, so in this case this is a lacrosse ball, but something like a tennis ball is fantastic to get into that tissue. What I've done here is I have 2 lacrosse balls. I've just got some sports tape. I've taped it together so it's almost like a peanut. And what that does is the gap, sort of the shape of the peanut sort of sits really well over the shin bone. So it'll be a nice comfortable way to do this. So what I find really useful is to put the ball in the part of your shin, and then depending on how comfortable you feel in this position, you can then just try and find where those tight spots tend to be. Now again, this can be quite tender on a lot of people, so just be gentle. Again, we're not really keen to roll up and down here. Essentially, we're trying to find some spots that feel tight and tender. We want to let the ball sort of sink in, and we can use the same proprioceptive neuromuscular technique from before, the PNF stretching or the contract relax stretching, to sort of help the ball sink into this tissue and free it up. And how that looks is if you take a deep breath in, same thing, and then if you tense up the muscle underneath the ball or in between the ball and and your shin bone, and then you tense it up, you can push your foot down into the ground, whatever you can do to tense the muscle up underneath the ball, and then when you relax, it should then sink in a little bit further than it could before. And it's a really great way to find those tight overloaded spots and again feed more slack into that shin. So the idea is we're trying to take some of the tissue, the tightness at the back, take some of the tightness at the front, the things that are asking that bone or that sort of musculotendinous junction as it attaches into the bone itself. We're trying to feed some slack into that to take the pressure off that, to try and resolve the irritation in there. So those 2 symptomatic treatments can be quite good at trying to reduce your symptoms, particularly if we're not necessarily advocating ice. And it can be a great way to try and get you moving a little bit more mobile than before. So keep those 2 in mind. Now the third piece sort of starts to transition into why this has happened in the first place. And one of the sort of little known facts about shin splints is that they are heavily reliant on your ankle being stiff, or at least stiffer than it could be. So you don't have to have the world's stiffest ankle, but if you're lacking a certain degree of mobility in that ankle that you need to run or even to walk, then it can force the body to sort of move that load somewhere else. So if you're running, for example, and you need to contact that ground and the ankle can't give as much as it could because it's stiff, then again, it's a recipe for increased load around these areas. And a fun fact, it's potentially one of the reasons why the tissue at the front and the calf at the back becomes tight in the first place. So the simple idea of ankle stiffness can really set all of this tissue up to be dysfunctional, which can then, the consequence of that can be that we get that shin splint symptom at the front there. So So again, we've gone through this exercise before, but we're going to use a power band. It's attached to something that's not going to move. We've got a video on this, and I'll link to that at the top here. But the idea is you want to place the band around your ankle. So in a perfect world, we're going to have the band pulling specifically backwards. But for the purposes of this video, I'll have it pulling off from the angle here so you can see. But the idea is you want enough tension on the band so it's nice and taut. And then with your foot and heel down, your foot straight, we're going to get you to bend your back ankle as far as you feel comfortable. And how that looks from the front, so again the band's pulling backwards here, is we're trying to bend that ankle as far as you feel comfortable, but not let the knee cave in. Because what we know is when you come up against some stiffness, your body doesn't slow you down to go through the stiffness, it basically just tries to figure out a way to go around it. And this sort of caving in position, again, can change the way that you load your shin up. So we want to make sure that that knee is not only going straight, but actually going out as far as you feel you can rotate through that ankle. So basically we're in this position, the knee's rotating out, and we're staying here for 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, as long as you feel you need to make significant change. 2 minutes is a good amount of time. And then what you should find is once you've done that, the ankle bone itself, or the ankle joint itself, should feel like it bends further than before. So that banded ankle stretch is a really important foundational exercise to do for shin splints because it chisels away at one of the potential factors that ask that shin to be sore in the first place. So, but what we know with ankle stiffness is it doesn't stand out. It often doesn't hurt, so it often gets missed unless you're specifically looking for it. So that ankle stretch is a fantastic way to do that. So that combined with the two sort of muscular stretches with through the front of the shin and the calf are three really quick exercises that you can do to try and sort of settle that down and improve the way it functions. So please give those a go. Let us know how you went in the comments below. If you have any feedback, let me know. So those three things are great starting points to try and get you through this, to solve this, to solve your shin splints at home. The next thing that I just want to talk about quickly is why that happens in the first place. And as a physical therapist, we become really good at recognizing patterns. And one pattern that often sets ankles up to get stiff, so the reason why an ankle gets stiff in the first place, which can then lead to shin splints, there's two things that often set us up for that. The first one are flip-flops or thongs, depending on where in the world you're from. A lot of people tend to get shin splints when they've been walking around in flip-flops over holidays, even in today's climate when we're just walking around more so, maybe not in work shoes, but just in flip-flops or thongs. What that does is your foot having to hold on to something changes the entire function of your ankle and results in that ankle getting stiff over time. So the arch can collapse, the ankle has to get stiff to try and stabilize it, or because we're in a thong or a flip-flop. So if you can avoid flip-flops and go for a self-securing sandal or a barefoot shoe or just a regular shoe in general, obviously going barefoot is best anyway, but if that's not appropriate for you, one of those other options would work best. Because if you're working really hard to free up a stiff ankle and then you're spending 6 or 7 hours a day in shoes that ask that to stiffen or footwear that stiffens it back up again, then we're going to be in this vicious cycle where you may not have the symptoms, but you haven't necessarily fixed the problem. So those symptoms will always have the potential to come back again at some point, particularly if you are an athlete or someone who is going to load up those shins and ankles more than the average person. You've got to have higher standards. Otherwise, you're sort of not only setting yourself up for failure, but you're robbing yourself of athleticism and athletic potential because you're stiff. So thongs and flip-flops are a huge one. Second one, again, we're getting a little bit more sophisticated with this, but the second thing that often leads to a stiff ankle are heeled shoes. So we're not just talking about your stereotypical women's heel, like a stiletto. The sad reality for a lot of footwear at the moment is that even little kids' shoes, all the way up to supportive shoes, business shoes, running shoes, just regular day-to-day shoes. It's hard to find a pair of shoes these days that doesn't have a thick heel at the back. There's certainly a lot more variety out these days, but if there's any differential between the front of your shoe and the back of your shoe, that's the exact amount of ankle range of motion you don't get access to while you're wearing the shoe. So as the old adage goes, if you don't use it, you lose it. So if you're in that pair of shoes often for work or for leisure or for sport, then the longer you're in those shoes for, the stiffer your ankle may become. So that when you are running around, or if you're out of those shoes into a flatter shoe, all of a sudden you're going to expose that stiffness and set yourself up for a range of issues, not just shin splints. But for the purposes of this video, heeled shoes and flip-flops / thongs are things to be aware of. So the less of those you can wear, the flatter the shoe, the better, which is often probably a story for another day, but it is better long term. That's something to be aware of. So hopefully that's at least a starting point to get you sorted with the shin splints. If you have any issues, then let us know. Again, if you did enjoy the video, if you found it useful, please leave a like below and consider subscribing. Again, it just helps this video sort of come across more people, and hopefully we can help them out as well. So keep an eye out for the next video. They sort of come out relatively frequently, almost daily. So until then, we'll see you. Bye.